Imagine commanding the most powerful empire on Earth, the world's largest navy, one of the best trained armies in Europe, unlimited financial resources compared to your enemy. Across the Atlantic, a rebellion is already beginning to collapse. Its army is exhausted, its soldiers are deserting, its government is running out of money. On paper, the war should already be over. Instead, just 2 years later, Britain would lose an entire army, France would enter the war, and what began as a colonial rebellion would become a global conflict. The surprising part isn't that Britain lost. The surprising part is how. Because Britain's greatest military disaster in America wasn't caused by George Washington. It wasn't caused by superior American tactics. And it wasn't caused by a lack of soldiers. It began with a plan that almost everyone believed was brilliant, a plan so logical that hardly anyone questioned it until it was too late. By 1777, the American Revolution had reached a dangerous point, not for Britain, for the Americans. The Continental Army had survived, but survival wasn't enough. Washington still struggled to keep his soldiers together. Many enlistments were about to expire. Supplies were running dangerously low. Money was disappearing even faster. Every month, the rebellion continued. It became harder to convince ordinary people that independence was actually possible. The British knew this. They didn't need to conquer every town. They didn't need to hunt down every militia unit. They only needed to break the rebellion's ability to keep fighting. Once that happened, the colonies would almost certainly return to British control. From London's perspective, victory wasn't a question of if, it was a question of how quickly. That confidence shaped every major decision the British made in 1777. And one decision stood above all the others. British commanders believed the rebellion had one critical weakness. It depended on unity. The 13 colonies didn't always agree with each other. They had different economies, different governments, different priorities, but they were connected. If Britain could break those connections, the revolution might collapse without having to defeat Washington in one decisive battle. The plan was remarkably simple. Cut New England off from the rest of the colonies. At the time, many British officers viewed New England as the heart of the rebellion. If that region could be isolated, the southern colonies might lose the will to continue fighting. On a map, the strategy looked almost perfect. 3 British armies would move toward Albany from different directions. General John Burgoyne would march south from Canada. Colonel Barry St. Leger would advance from the west through the Mohawk Valley. General William Howe would move north from New York. 3 armies, 1 meeting point, 1 decisive campaign. If everything happened according to plan, the colonies would be split in 2. Washington would lose the initiative, and the rebellion might never recover. There was only one problem. This entire strategy depended on something that 18th century warfare could almost never guarantee: perfect coordination. And Britain was about to discover just how dangerous that assumption could be. To understand why this strategy seemed so convincing, you have to forget what happened next. Because in the spring of 1777, nothing about the British plan looked reckless. In fact, it looked inevitable. Britain wasn't trying to destroy Washington's army in one dramatic battle. It was trying to make that army irrelevant. Military victories don't always come from defeating your enemy. Sometimes, they come from taking away his options. That was exactly what this campaign was designed to do. New England was more than just another region. It was where the rebellion had begun. It was home to some of its strongest supporters. If British forces could separate it from the middle and southern colonies, moving supplies would become harder. Messages would take longer to arrive. Militia forces would struggle to support one another. The rebellion wouldn't disappear overnight, but it might slowly fall apart. Like cutting the roots of a tree. You don't have to remove every branch. You only have to stop feeding them. Everything depended on one city, Albany, located along the Hudson River. It was the point where Britain's 3 advancing armies were supposed to meet. If they succeeded, the Hudson Valley would become a British-controlled corridor stretching from Canada almost to New York City. For the first time since the war began, the colonies would be physically divided. To British officers, the logic was difficult to argue against. 3 armies, 1 objective: complete control of the most important route in the Northeast. On paper, it looked less like a gamble and more like mathematics, but plans rarely fail because of what they include. They fail because of what they assume. The British strategy assumed that 3 separate armies could move hundreds of miles, through forests, across rivers, over mountains, and arrive at almost exactly the same time. That assumption sounded reasonable until you remembered the year. This wasn't the age of railways, or telegraphs, or radios. A message sent from one army to another could take days, sometimes weeks. A message sent across the Atlantic could take months. Commanders often made decisions without knowing where friendly forces actually were or what they were doing. By the time new orders arrived, the situation had often changed completely. Britain wasn't fighting one campaign. It was trying to coordinate several campaigns at once, across an entire continent. The larger the plan became, the more fragile it became, because every additional army added another commander, another route, another schedule, another opportunity for something to go wrong. The British believed they had built a machine. In reality, they had built a chain, and chains don't fail all at once. They fail one link at a time. One of those links was General William Howe. Unlike many British commanders, Howe wasn't reckless. He had already defeated Washington several times. He had captured New York. He commanded one of the strongest British armies in North America. His judgment carried enormous weight, and that made his next decision even more important. Officially, Howe was expected to support General Burgoyne's advance from Canada. If the two armies joined near Albany, the entire British strategy would finally come together. But Howe saw the war differently. He believed the quickest path to victory wasn't Albany, it was Philadelphia, the American capital, the seat of the Continental Congress. Capture the enemy's political center, and perhaps the rebellion itself would collapse. From Howe's perspective, the decision made perfect sense. Wars are often won by taking capitals. History offered plenty of examples. There was only one problem. The British strategy didn't depend on what made sense for one army. It depended on what all three armies did together. During the summer of 1777, General Howe faced a choice. He could follow the original plan, march north, meet Burgoyne near Albany, and complete the campaign exactly as London had intended. Or he could pursue what he believed was the more important objective, Philadelphia. At the time, Philadelphia wasn't just another city. It was the political heart of the rebellion. The Continental Congress met there. Foreign diplomats watched events from there. Many British officers believed that capturing the city would deal a devastating psychological blow. If the American government lost its capital, perhaps the rebellion itself would begin to unravel. It wasn't an unreasonable idea. In fact, history is filled with wars decided by the fall of a capital city. Howe wasn't ignoring the war. He believed he was ending it. So instead of marching north, his army sailed south, leaving New York behind. The campaign toward Philadelphia had begun. From Howe's perspective, the decision was logical. From Burgoyne's perspective, nothing had changed, because no one had told him otherwise. Hundreds of miles away, General John Burgoyne continued moving south from Canada. His orders remained exactly the same: advance toward Albany, expect support, meet Howe, split the colonies in two. Every mile he marched, he believed another British army was moving toward him. That belief shaped every decision he made. He pushed deeper into unfamiliar territory, accepted longer supply lines, took greater risks, because he wasn't expecting to fight alone. He was expecting to become part of a much larger force. The deeper Burgoyne advanced, the more confident he remained. The plan still made sense. The timetable still seemed possible. After all, why wouldn't Howe be coming? The orders had been clear. What Burgoyne couldn't see was that the campaign he believed he was fighting no longer existed. Today, a commander can send a message across the world in seconds. In 1777, even sending one across New York could take days. Messages traveled on horseback, along rivers, through forests, across roads that barely deserved the name. Every delay created uncertainty. Every uncertainty forced commanders to make assumptions, and assumptions are dangerous in war. London believed its generals understood the overall strategy. The generals believed London understood the realities in America. Meanwhile, the generals themselves often had only a partial picture of what the others were doing. Howe knew where he was going. Burgoyne knew where he was going, but neither truly knew what the other intended. There was no single moment when communication failed. It failed little by little. One delayed letter, one misunderstood instruction, one independent decision. Each one seemed small. Together, they quietly dismantled Britain's entire strategy. Because a coordinated plan is only as strong as the as Burgoyne marched farther south, the landscape became as dangerous as the enemy. Dense forests slowed every advance. Roads had to be cleared. Bridges had to be rebuilt. Heavy artillery couldn't simply roll forward. Entire sections of road had to be constructed before the wagons could continue. Every mile demanded time. Every day consumed supplies. Food grew scarce. Horses collapsed from exhaustion. Wagons broke down. The supply line stretched farther and farther back toward Canada. And the farther it stretched, the easier it became to attack. American militia understood they couldn't defeat Burgoyne in one great battle. They didn't need to. Instead, they attacked the army's weakest points. Supply wagons disappeared. Scouting parties were ambushed. Trees were felled across roads. Bridges were destroyed. Each attack delayed the British advance only a little. But those delays accumulated. An army that was supposed to move quickly began crawling through the wilderness. The cruel irony was that Burgoyne still believed time was on his side. He assumed Howe was moving toward him. He assumed every difficult mile brought him closer to the rest of the British army. In reality, every mile carried him farther from it. By the time Burgoyne began to suspect something was wrong, his army was already deep inside hostile territory. Its supplies were shrinking, its escape routes were growing longer, and the help he expected was marching in an entirely different direction. Information holding it together, and that information was already falling apart. By September, General Burgoyne finally understood something was terribly wrong. The army he expected to find never arrived. General Howe was hundreds of miles away in Philadelphia. St. Leger's advance had already collapsed, and Burgoyne was alone. For weeks, he had continued marching under the assumption that Britain's strategy was still unfolding exactly as planned. Now that illusion disappeared, but by then, turning back was almost as dangerous as moving forward. Behind him stretched hundreds of miles of damaged roads. Bridges had been destroyed. Supplies were running low. American militia controlled much of the surrounding countryside. Retreat no longer meant safety. It meant exposing an exhausted army to weeks of constant attacks. For the first time, Burgoyne faced a reality he had never expected. He wasn't leading one part of a coordinated campaign anymore. He was leading an isolated army deep inside enemy territory. And every hour that passed, the Americans became stronger, not because thousands of new soldiers suddenly appeared, but because they kept gathering. Militia units arrived from nearby towns. Local volunteers joined the Continental Army. Every British delay gave the Americans more time to prepare. The battlefield Burgoyne had hoped to reach no longer existed. His enemy had changed, and so had the balance of the campaign. The fighting around Saratoga wasn't decided by one dramatic charge or one brilliant maneuver. It was decided by momentum. American forces under General Horatio Gates had chosen strong defensive positions. Benedict Arnold, despite his growing disputes with other commanders, repeatedly pushed for aggressive attacks whenever opportunities appeared. Meanwhile, Burgoyne faced the opposite problem. Every casualty mattered. Every cannonball was difficult to replace. Every wagon of food had become precious. His army wasn't simply fighting the Americans. It was fighting exhaustion. The British attacked several times. Each assault gained ground, then lost it again. The Americans didn't need a spectacular victory. They only needed to keep the British exactly where they were. Every failed attack consumed more ammunition, more food, more time, and time had become Burgoyne's greatest enemy. As the days passed, his options became fewer, his soldiers became weaker, his supplies became smaller. His hopes of reinforcement disappeared completely. By early October, the campaign that had begun with confidence had become a struggle simply to survive. On October 17, 1777, General John Burgoyne surrendered. Nearly 6,000 British and German soldiers laid down their weapons. It remains one of the largest British surrenders in military history, but Saratoga wasn't remarkable because of the number of prisoners. It was remarkable because of what it proved. Britain hadn't lost because its soldiers lacked courage. They had fought well. Its officers weren't inexperienced. Many were among the finest professionals in Europe. The problem had begun months earlier, the moment one campaign became two, the moment one commander pursued a different objective, the moment communication failed to keep an entire strategy together. By the time Burgoyne surrendered, the battle itself was almost an afterthought. The campaign had already been lost. Saratoga simply made that reality impossible to ignore. For observers across Europe, the surrender sent an unmistakable message. If Britain could lose an entire army in America, then perhaps the rebellion wasn't doomed after all, and one European kingdom was paying especially close attention: France. Within months, everything would change. News of Burgoyne's surrender crossed the Atlantic in the winter of 1777. For months, European governments had watched the American Revolution from a distance. Most believed the outcome was inevitable. Britain was simply too powerful. The colonies might resist, they might win a few battles, but eventually, the British Empire would restore control. Saratoga changed that calculation overnight. For the first time, a professional British army hadn't just been defeated, it had surrendered to France. That meant something far more important than a single lost campaign. Campaign. It meant Britain could be beaten. For years, France had searched for an opportunity to weaken its greatest rival. Now, it finally had proof that supporting the American Revolution wasn't a gamble, it was an investment. In February 1778, France officially recognized the United States. Soon afterward, it entered the war. The conflict was no longer about 13 colonies. It became a global struggle. British ships suddenly had to defend the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, India, the English Channel. Resources that had once been focused on America were now needed across the world. The balance of the war had changed forever, and it all began with one failed campaign in upstate New York. History often remembers Saratoga as the battle that saved the American Revolution. But that's only part of the story. The real importance of Saratoga wasn't what happened on the battlefield. It was what happened afterward. Before Saratoga, Britain was fighting a rebellion. After Saratoga, it was fighting one of Europe's greatest powers. That single change transformed the entire war, because Britain's greatest strength had always been its ability to concentrate overwhelming force. Now, that force had to be divided across multiple continents. Ironically, the same problem Britain had tried to create for the colonies became its own. Its armies were separated, its fleets were stretched thin, its commanders were forced to protect distant parts of an empire all at once. The strategy designed to divide America ended up dividing Britain's own attention. At the beginning of this story, Britain appeared unstoppable, the strongest navy in the world, one of Europe's finest armies. More experience, more money, more soldiers. On paper, none of that should have been enough to lose a war against 13 colonies. And yet, the campaign of 1777 exposed something that numbers alone could never reveal. A brilliant strategy isn't measured by how impressive it looks on a map. It's measured by whether it can survive reality. Britain's plan required 3 armies to think, move, and fight as one. But an ocean separated London from its generals. Hundreds of miles separated the armies from one another, and weeks separated every important decision. The strategy never truly failed at Saratoga. It failed the moment it depended on perfect coordination in an imperfect world.